So the issue of identity and nationhood has three aspects which are interrelated, and I will deal with each one of them. One is identity itself, the second is governance, and the third is the issue of migration and the way it's going to impact all of us in this country. Now today, as we know, when you look around us, you'll find identity is rearing its head as a major driver of politics today, as ideology retreats in the face of globalization and the dominant role of markets and the private sector. In that sense, it is the end of, if not history, at least of ideology. To speak of ideology today is almost considered antediluvian, and it is like speaking of ethics, morality, decorum, etc. We appear to be in for a spell of a very utilitarian outlook, with people choosing anything that works over things that are worthwhile. So therefore, in today's age, the individual and freedom and independence as defined from the perspective of the individual have been elevated to the level of ideas to be protected, to be aspired for. Interdependence, cooperation and harmony as goals worth fighting for have sort of been neglected. Now, just look back 67 years ago. India was formed out of 600 plus independent princely states through the sagacity and ability of people like Sardar Patel and his able lieutenant V.P. Menon and a host of other leaders. A giant nation was stitched out of an improbable collection of fractious states. An even greater task of nation building awaited the leaders of free India. Belying all expectations that this big, huge, unwieldy country would break up. All over the world, we have seen countries breaking up. The USSR, Yugoslavia, there are many examples. And the process continues. The Arab Spring movement, which we are talking about, which is sweeping across the Middle East, is going to lead to breakup and restructuring of countries in that region as well. So we seem to have somehow survived. Not only somehow survived, here this country is now ranked as an emerging market. It's seen as a potential economic superpower sometime in the future. But I think the time has come for us in India to address squarely the issue of identity and nationhood. As we see all around us, identity beginning to raise its head. Demands for smaller states, which is a very practical and probably a sensible demand, are springing up. What are these differences that appear so deeply embedded to prevent dialogue and cooperation? You know, we see these differences as something very difficult to surmount, isn't it? Identity, based on religion, caste, community, ethnic identity, etc. After all, it was barely 60,000 years ago that our ancestors started out on the great trek from the Great Rift Valley in Africa and proceeded to colonize the planet, developing differences in color, physiognomy, eating habits, etc. along the way as they adapted to the local environment. They all came from the Great Rift Valley. And now here, on the basis of how people look, the differences, the color, etc., we are prepared to kill, and we think these are such issues on which so much passion can be generated. 60,000 years ago, we came from the same place. So this is the first issue, is that of identity. The second issue which I mentioned is governance. It's a related issue and has an impact on the way in which identity and the issues raised by identity are going to be dealt with. There has been an undoubted decline in the quality of governance. We see it all around us. So I won't labor the point. This is partly due to the opportunistic way politicians have sought to bend the bureaucracy to their narrow and short-term ends. Family and dynastic rules, while weakening political processes, have further damaged the administrative machinery, with the use of indiscriminate and discretionary transfers breaking the morale of officers. Here again, we need to experiment with solutions with the view to see what works best. Such a trial and error approach at the field level is better than grand master plans or overhauls of the administrative system, which in any case seem to take ages. If you want to delay something or not to decide on something, appoint a committee, administrative reforms committee. And that's the end of that you won't hear anything more about that. I think at the district administration holds the key to understanding this puzzle, which I mentioned right at the beginning. How is such a huge, diverse country, where if you compare India and Europe, the word diversity loses its meaning. So diversity here in India, I think more than any other part of the world, assumes meaning which is completely different. So such a diverse country, born under such difficult conditions in 1947, the major partition which was done, I think, without the will of the people, imposed by the British colonial rulers, and born in fire and blood and everything, 67 years later is still continuing to function. Truly, that is one of the great miracles of the second half of the 20th century, and I don't think that has been given enough attention. People, historians, scholars, I think people like Ramchandra Guha and others should bend their powerful minds to explaining to us how did this happen, because all explanations seem to be very trite and very facile and somehow inadequate. I have a small offering here in terms of one explanation. One possible explanation is the fact that a lot of the administration, far from the state capitals and especially the national capital, happens in the districts. 640 odd districts in this country have a governance system which continues to function while all these storms in teacups happen in Delhi and in the state capitals. Governments come and governments go, but the district administration goes on. We have never thought about that, isn't it? That the quotidian processes of government, day in and day out, which the citizen experiences, they experience in the districts, in the taluk offices, in the tehsils, in the village offices, in the district offices. And there it goes on, undisturbed, regardless of which government comes in, which government goes. All these are big things which happen in the headlines of newspapers, but not in this place. So that could be an explanation. Finally, the third issue, the third part of this, which is interrelated, is the issue of migration. In this big country where states were formed on linguistic basis, I don't think the planners then or subsequently factored in migration as the disruptive factor here, isn't it? So we had these states divided according to language. Then what happened? People will migrate where there are jobs. There is a push factor because of the areas they come from, or a pull factor where they are pulled into, isn't it? So the first great migrations in India were into the big cities, especially you take Mumbai. Bombay was the big magnet. And a lot of the people came from the south. They migrated into Bombay, and then also from UP and Bihar and all that have gone into Bombay. See, young people, the youth, especially in their teens and in their early 20s, want to be engaged. They want to be inspired. They don't want advice. And I think, unfortunately, what the older generation keeps on dishing out to them is a lot of advice. They want to be engaged. One way of engaging with them is to give them an opportunity to test out their ideas. So I proposed, and I'm proposing to you, that we should set up, I made a specific proposal of Imphal, and I'm working on that, but I'm saying in Kohima, in Guwahati, in Aizawl, and other places, we should start with a proposal to set up an incubator to engage with the young people of that area, to get their ideas, their entrepreneurial ideas, support them with some small startup seed funding. Most important, mentoring and other assistance and support to take it to the next stage. This will be one way of us engaging with the Northeast. Us as citizens, members of civil society, not waiting for government to do something, but to come forward and do something which we can, at a scale which we can do.